Let's look at the assessing primary and secondary sources. So that's your author credentials, date of publication, primary source, secondary source, and then, of course, audience. So one thing that is very important is author qualifications, and that speaks a lot to ethos, right? If we were looking at the rhetorical devices that we might use in a particular paper, ethos, pathos, kairos, right? And the ethos is very important. So you want to assess the author's credentials. What is the author's institutional affiliation? Is the author a tenured professor or adjunct professor? Is the author a scholar in his or her field? Is the author a subject matter expert? And what is the author's expertise? Is the source part of the author's expertise? And so institutional affiliation, you don't necessarily have to go to Harvard in order to be of real importance, but it does matter if you are a professor at Harvard and you are the director of a particular program for which the topic is the main course of study. Meaning, like, if you were looking at, say, the concept of race, double consciousness, diversity, or something, and Harvard had a department guided by, say, Africana Studies or African American Studies, or a writing program where their sole focus was on exploring scholarship in that area, then it lends a lot of credibility to the reader interpreting your ability to speak on the topic, because you are surrounded by it every day, all day. You write on it, you teach on it, you study it. You write scholarly texts, you write some fictional books, you write some non-fictional books, you write historical books. Maybe you provide commentary at a conference. Maybe you speak on it as a historian on a cable news network or something like that. But that is your main course of study that concerns you. And so the institutional affiliation that also supports that goal is just as important. Being a tenured professor definitely suggests that you have contributed to your field, because no one can just really get a tenured professor position just because they want to. Going through the tenure process requires going through pre-tenure track and then going through the tenure process, which can be upwards of double-digit years. And so you are contributing to the field through writing, scholarship, you're teaching, you're doing other types of research, you may head projects, you may be on a committee. And so by the time you become tenured professor, you have done so much work. The adjunct professor is basically your part-time faculty. They do not get the same types of salaries, so it's often difficult. And you might see adjunct professors work in multiple institutions like I do. And so that tends to be kind of like the entry level. The true entry level for some institutions is lecturer. And then even before that, if you were a graduate student, a graduate TA. So you have a hierarchy in the faculty arena. And so how much time have you spent at that institution, contributing to that institution, supporting that institution, does make a big difference, because you're not just this person who's one and done. You care about the institution to support what's going on there. And then is the author a scholar in his or her field? And usually you get the accolades of scholar, meaning that you have written so many types of books, and then you might have received a scholar designation from an organization, and now you are perceived as a scholar as a result of writing and contributing to the field. And so scholar implies that you are here to stay, just like subject matter expert implies or suggests that you are here to stay, that you have created multiple annotated bibliographies in your field. That is something that is a standard for you, so much to the point that you are so familiar with all the different arguments that you can speak on it freely, you can speak on it with confidence, and you can speak on it with authority. So subject matter expert, when you are researching the author's background, these are the questions you want to ask, and that's something that you want to think about even for yourself if you later want to become a scholar yourself. That creating the annotated bibliography will help you to build confidence in your knowledge base. And then what is the author's expertise? So for instance, is the work that you are skimming at first and then reading later a part of the author's expertise? That did they write the book, right? How many years have they supported that first book with another book, etc.? But it does matter if the author is expert in this particular topic. That's why you often have people who serve as experts for juries, who experts for the prosecution, or experts for the defense. That these are people that can be trusted because they have worked in the field, they have contributed to the field, they study the field, they study everything that's surrounding the field, and they are expert in what they are doing. So when you are looking at each author, and this is why you have to allow enough time, because if you have to integrate a minimum of 10 sources, that's going to take some time to go through these questions to determine if the author is credible. So let's look at publication date, additions, and revisions. So you want to look at the publication date. A lot of times, I know in graduate school, we are to integrate sources. We were supposed to integrate sources not more than 5 years old. With English, I have a master's degree in English, and so we always have to integrate the classical works, the canon. And so those works can go as far as back as, the 16th century. But I'm also a graduate psychology student working on my second master's. And I noticed that for many of the assignments that we have to write in terms of essays, that one part of the instructions is look for sources that do not exceed 5 years, right? 5 years old. So there are some classical sources within that particular within that discipline that you must consider, but the bulk of your sources have to reveal much more in terms of current hypotheses, current use of research methodologies, and then current results based on a particular type of topic, right? So you want to look at the publication date, whether or not it is a first or second or updated edition. So you will see that a lot of times. Is the source out of date for your field? So again, it depends on the field. It depends on the topic. If you are looking at, juvenile statistics, you usually marriage statistics, you want something within the 5 years. But if you were looking at the historical nature of how juvenile institutions came to be, then of course you're going to go further back in terms of the history of juvenile institutions. But you have to balance it with not only the old and the new. So you want to look at source, whether or not it is out of date for your field, and only the information in your textbooks will tell you, as well as your instructor will tell you, whether or not that source is out of date for your field. What does your current discipline require regarding use of sources? So I noticed with arts and humanities, for English, we are required to integrate quotes, sometimes line by line, sometimes block quoting, use of quotation marks, and then end of sentence citation referencing. But when I write papers for my psychology classes, I notice that I get a lot of comments about not quoting, that you can still reference the source without having to quote it directly, and that you just add a citation at the end of the sentence line, right? And so each each discipline requires, different things. I can't remember what was required for my history classes when I was an undergraduate student, but I would assume today, in reflecting on that the teacher did not want a whole lot of line by line quoting because of it being, historical nature, and only maybe the analysis part of it, where you got a source and you were using their analysis to support your argument, that you should quote that. So each major or discipline requires use of sources in a different way, and it is up to you to determine which one does that. Social science majors typically require use of sources that is at a minimum of 5 years or less, since knowledge continually changes. However, for arts and humanities, material written more than 5 years is appropriate for academic and scholarly writing. And even in new age type scholarly writing, contemporary writing, modern or something like that, you will still see references to the classical canonical texts. Assessing primary sources, so anything other than the horse's mouth is considered a secondary source. So that means your primary sources are usually scholarly and peer-reviewed journals, schools, colleges, Bureau of Labor Statistics, educational associations, discipline-specific organizations, and then National Center for Education Statistics. So these are the ones that I usually use when I teach the annotated bibliography with the personal statement, because you want to research the schools prior to writing a personal statement, so then you can be able to tailor the personal statement. So that's why I have this information about Bureau of Labor Statistics, then of course schools and colleges, etc. So like I said before at the beginning, that if you are researching a school, you don't research a third-party website about that school. You go to the school's website to get that information. If you want to learn about labor statistics, even if a school's website is integrating that information onto their website, you still want to go to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics to get that direct information. So anything other than the horse's mouth, I like using that. So anything other than the horse's mouth is considered a secondary source. Not that secondary sources are not important, but when you are representing the topic, you want to be as credible as possible. Assessing secondary sources. So secondary sources are typically based on primary sources. So that could be a book review, bibliography, popular periodical like a Reader's Digest, Vogue, or Ebony, any sort of magazine, newspapers, substantive news such as The Economist, The New York Times, and then tabloids such as the National Enquirer. The way you can judge secondary sources is that whatever they're saying is something saying about a primary source, or something being said about another book that they are talking about. Well, that's a secondary source. Consider it it is obvious that a book review would be a secondary source, right? But if you are integrating it also into your paper, the analysis in your paper, then anything said after the author has explored the book could be considered a primary source, right? So any bibliography, a biography, all of those are considered secondary source, because the autobiography, by contrast, would be written by the actual person, and that would be a primary source. Looking at the audience, so there is a discipline specific audience, so it could be a business major or discipline, science, accounting, history, right? So you have different audience for different topics. Subject matter experts, we've already discussed. A broad audience of concerned citizens and community members. So these could be formerly educated people who used to be connected with the institution, and sometimes they visit the institution to audit courses, or they may attend some seminars or something like that. But these are people who still may not work directly for the institution, but they are part of the community and they care about education, or they care about that institution directly and how students are being educated. They may have grandkids or something like that, and might try to push their own agendas, right? Because they used to be former students, right? So that's something to think about as well. Educated audience, these are people who are still part of the community, but they may be retired as well. Scholarly journals, anything you write, if you are submitting it to a journal, is going to reflect the main audience, the journal itself, and then all of the readers of that journal. And then any data driven scientific audience. So, there are certain audiences you just cannot fool. You have to be careful. I understand that there are people who create all types of schemes and can get by with a lot of different types of strategies, but eventually you're going to hit that one audience that you can't fool, that they're going to know just by listening to you that you don't know what you are talking about, and you are trying to fool them. So understanding your audience does make a big difference.